I said, this is the Kitsap Sun's editorial board. We're talking with Loretta Byrnes, who's a candidate for the 23rd District State House position. What we always start with is allowing you to take 2 minutes to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, where you came from, and then we'll go into some Q&A. Go ahead.
Are we starting now?
We're starting.
Because I thought we were waiting for another person.
He may walk in, but let's just, I don't want to hold it up any longer.
Okay, so my name is Loretta Byrnes, and I'm running for state representative in the 23rd. My home is Washington State, went to high school in Olympia, and then I did my bachelor's degree at Washington State University and my master's at Oregon State University in natural resource economics. And I decided when I was 19 that I wanted to go into international development. And so I went overseas right after about a year after finishing my master's with my 1-year-old son, Gabriel. And we went to Bangladesh and as a volunteer. And I spent ultimately 17 years designing and managing food security and economic development programs in Bangladesh, Rwanda, and Sierra Leone. I also did my master's research in North Yemen, used to be North Yemen then. And then I came back in 2008. I met my husband in 2007 while I was still living in Bangladesh, and he's an engineer at the Bremerton Naval Shipyard. So I came back in 2008, back to Washington, and we got married in 2009, which is when I moved to Kitsap County. And when I moved to Kitsap County, I wanted to get involved here. And similar to how I worked overseas, I started looking at like, how do people do things here? How does government work here? What are the issues? And that kind of thing. And I looked for opportunities to volunteer. I volunteered at Mission Creek Correctional Facility, and I joined the League of Women Voters, and I thought with some of this, I liked the idea of being part of a nonpartisan group. And then I was appointed to the Kitsap County Surface and Stormwater Advisory Board, which was really important because I'm an environmentalist at heart, and I enjoyed learning about their work in terms of, because it's you know, trying to keep the pollution out of the Puget Sound. And I also I ended up being chair on that group, but I also did more than our regular meetings. I worked with them because what I did overseas was design programs, which means you design goals, you have to articulate measurable outcomes and that kind of thing. And I've seen that in government, they're supposed to be doing that, like with Gregoire's GMAP program. But what I've also seen is while they ask government agencies to do these things, they don't provide training. And it's kind of an art and a science, and so I helped with the various partners to work on those aspects. And then I ultimately went to work for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and at which point we moved from Seabeck to Poulsbo. And then I started my 4-hour-a-day commute.
Did you commute to?
I commuted to Seattle, yeah. And then I was also traveling 25 to 30% of the time. So I was still I still managed to attend our surface and stormwater meetings, and then eventually they closed down that group. And at the same time, we still had children at home. We had our 2 youngest at home. So between the 2 of us, we have 8 children. 6 have attended Olympic Community College. First 5 graduated through the CK schools. The last 2 graduated from Kingston High School. The last one graduated last year. And we have 4 children-in-laws, I call them. Am I repeating myself? And 2 grandsons. And so now I'm at the point where I'm not traveling and we're not taking care of children at home. And so I wanted to get more involved again locally. One of the issues that I'm sorry, I think I've gone beyond 2 minutes.
You
right?
have. I was going to say. It was
at the last meeting, I had a guy with a paddle. So anyways, with that many children, well, I've been concerned about the issue of education since my son was in the 3rd grade, and a third of his class couldn't read and write. And those are still the same statistics that we have today. And my son's 28. And with the youngest 2 graduating recently, I've been really concerned still about the quality of education which is one of the big reasons why I decided to run.
Let's stay right on that topic. 'Cause
Okay.
that was one that we wanted to ask about.
Okay.
I mean, maybe I'll even let you lead on this. Education's important to you. Tell me maybe where your priorities are then. In this complex thing,
Yeah.
clearly all the rest of it.
The way I wanted to really understand why things were the way they are. So over 2 years ago, I started going to our North Kitsap School Board meetings, and I've been attending 90% of the meetings and looking at the reports, looking at the policy, looking at the programs, looking at the data, and then looking at the related existing state legislation that is driving those programs. What concerns me is that, we sort of have a definition for basic education, but there's this constant push to expand it. And I think we need to keep it defined. But within that, there's all kinds of things that are being included in basic education that are not defined. And so for example, in North Kitsap, we are now doing 3 different kinds of tests. So the Smarter Balance Assessment is now the required test. And I get the impression that nobody's really happy with that particular assessment, so we're continuing with the other ones. One of the things that concerned me when I first started going to the meetings is that they were also doing already 2 years ago and doing different tests, and then they keep changing the test every 3 to 4 years. We're still talking about the same math that was invented, 1,000, 2,000 years ago or more. We can't keep changing the goalpost. And so I think we need to be very careful about making these huge decisions with the Smarter Balance Assessment, with Common Core, without really people having a say in where we're going.
Are you more bothered with what those look like today, or the change, the nature of that it moves around? I mean, if they were to say Common Core is kind of what we're using, these are the agreed upon standards, and we're going to stick with them and do it right, are you okay with that, or is it?
I think if we could stick with the standards, that would be good. And then there's one standard, but then there's standards, okay, that's saying, okay, you're supposed to know this and this and this. But then they develop the test. So you really have to look at, is it the appropriate test? Do we want to spend, a school spending a week, 2 weeks administering one test in addition to the other test? So it's also the nature of the test, the logistics of the test. We need to be careful about that. But there's also the curriculum. So for example, I started saying, okay, well now this test is to measure Common Core curriculum. So when our school district said, okay, now everybody can look at our new Common Core curriculum for English and Language Arts, I went and actually looked at it. And that's very concerning to me because it micromanages the teacher, really, like every single step that they do in teaching. And I'll give you one sort of detailed example. I was looking at the first grade material. I've studied 3 different languages in addition to English, okay? And at first grade, you're having teachers and they're telling teachers about cognates and cognates between Spanish and English and all of the Spanish vocabulary. Maybe most people who become first grade teachers actually don't study a foreign language or don't know them. But the micromanaging of the curriculum, how that drives teachers is concerning. And I've discussed this with teachers, and teachers are very concerned about it as well. So it's the whole system.
Some of that comes from the district level, however, and especially in North Kitsap, that's one of the complaints with the current leadership is there's too much management on the district level. So
that's an administrative
when you're
thing,
in
but
the house,
not necessarily a curriculum issue.
What
though.
change would you like to see in the house to address what you're saying? I'm saying it comes from multiple places. It's not just one place. So what would be the legislative change you'd
from
like
the
to
House issue, they've decided on Common Core and they've decided on the SBA, so it kind of goes back. At the House level, we're looking at similarly, the policies are so detailed. We have policies that are also micromanaging the districts and micromanaging the schools and the teachers as well. And I was sharing an example, and so I think, I don't want to go into too much detail, but we need to look at that legislation and be careful. There are certain things that the state should say, okay, this is going to be standard for everyone. But then there's other things that we should leave it more up to the schools and more up to the districts. And so we need to be more careful about that boundary. We also, at this, and it's kind of a lot
Give
of.
me a quick one
Oh,
of this.
sorry,
Give
go
me
ahead.
just a quick
Okay.
one of, illustrate the state
Okay,
one.
so-
What is good standards from the state?
By standards, or you mean
You just said,
discipline or boundaries?
yeah,
Okay.
boundaries. Give me
I'll give you one example. We, they call it the sort of the senior project that all seniors were supposed to do in order to graduate. The state made it a requirement, right? So, and we've had our kids do this, and to be honest, they really didn't get much out of it. When the school district asked the students said, well, it might have been more useful if we'd done it in 10th grade, because it's the idea is that you're planning for after high school. And maybe we should start planning in 10th grade to make sure we get art classes. But then I went back and I read the state policy, and they've decided to move it up to 8th grade. So now they want 8th graders to start developing their career plans. And we've had 8th graders recently. and then they go to in other detail. Okay, the 8th grader also has to update their resume. They have to have a resume in 8th grade. They have to have career goals in 8th grade. And then they have to update the resume every year, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade. That's in a state policy. I think a high school should be able to
Sure.
decide whether that is even
Who it
a
applies to.
valid.
Give me one on the other side of the equation. You said
Okay.
there are some things you said the state should hold this standard.
The 24 credits. Okay, so they've decided that in order to graduate, kids should have 24 credits. And they've also decided that that should include a foreign language. And they've also decided how much math, how much language arts, and I think, yeah,
Kind of sitting up.
Right there. Yep.
At the risk of oversimplifying your position,
okay.
what I think I heard you say was that if the definition of basic education was limited from its expansion, it would be easier to solve the McCleary issue. Is that what you just said?
Yes, yeah,
Because it would be cheaper if you don't
Right.
keep expanding the scope.
right. So for example, they just added all-day kindergarten. And I think including kindergarten in basic education is probably a good idea, okay? But now,
What about below that?
I don't think we should do
Okay.
below that. And I don't think, because people are also talking about including the first 2 years of community college, and I don't think we should do that. I think we should leave it K through 12.
What is the reasoning for leaving it just a K through 12 and not early learning?
Because I was talking to somebody recently who's a daycare provider, okay? Now they've made rules, and these are the things that you don't see. They've made rules that for her to provide daycare for low-income children, she now has to do preschool, okay, as per state standards, even if the parents don't want it or it isn't important to them. Okay, and now, not only does she have to do that, as a private daycare provider, her staff also have to join a union. Okay, so daycare is in short supply, it's not cheap, so we're doing things inadvertently that are gonna decrease the supply of daycare by creating more bureaucracy. And what I see the state trying to do is you're gonna lose private sector daycare providers, you're gonna drive up the cost, and then you're gonna create the opportunity for the state to take over daycare, now called preschool. Okay, so it's gonna be a little bit more than, and I've worked for state government, okay? That is gonna be a lot more expensive, and it's not gonna be just more expensive for parents, if they do pay for it, but whereas a parent might be paying $7 an hour or $10 an hour now for daycare, we are all going to be spending twice that amount for daycare preschool. So it's a way I see that the government should not compete with the private sector and not over-regulate it to the point that you drive them out of business.
So let's, if we're saying that with the private sector doing what it wants to do, where do you get pricing at with that? Where does the limit of pricing come lower? Because that's the issue with the private sector is what they charge is entirely more than what average working parents can afford. So when we
Right.
say, let them be as it is without the regulations, when does it stop to say it's not just business? Meaning that teach for it
Yeah,
privately. It's,
Right.
it's different than Head Start, ECAP, or anything like that. But when you just let them do what they want, you get to what you're to now, where a child is $860 a week. You know?
Right,
So,
but-
you know, where does the government
as
say?
as an economist, I have to get back to the basics of supply and demand.
Mm,
So if you force down the price of something or control the price of something, the supply will go down, right? So then you'll have less daycare. If you start having less daycare providers, then eventually the price is gonna go up. So if I understand your
yeah,
correction, you
yeah,
can't do price controls.
You're
I'm
letting
sorry,
those- you're
I'm a
letting those-
capitalist.
You're letting those providers compete with each other.
You
Each
let
other
them
for-
compete with
whether
each other.
that goes up.
Now, if they want to,
Yeah.
if they want to add preschool, and they say, we're not just daycare, we're preschool, and therefore we charge this amount, they can market their business that way. Or if they want to do preschool, but we shouldn't compel them. So. And we shouldn't compel, and the other issue, you hear people in kindergarten, I can still actually remember, I can still remember being in kindergarten. Kindergarten was a place where you learned by doing and playing and relaxing and napping and making butter and stuff like that. And now they're trying to get kindergartners, they want to start that reading and writing thing at kindergarten level. We just added kindergarten, and we should let kindergarten be kindergarten, because now people are feeling compelled to teach and do education or teaching in preschool so that they can be reading by the time they're in kindergarten. So I don't know.
Let me ask, I understand what you
Okay.
mean. What I think on the other end of the spectrum, you said it's the idea of making community college free and included in the K through 12 system. That's what you would be.
No, that's not what I would mean.
Okay, maybe clarify it so I
Okay,
understand.
community, that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that aspect when they said, because people are pushing now to include the first 2 years
I
of
guess
college.
that's,
Yeah.
to include in the public schools.
Yeah, I think that's a lot more, I think they have their hands full with K through 12.
Okay.
And it concerns me, 5 of our kids did Running Start. Okay, so by the time they graduated high school, they had their associate's degrees. Now, that was great savings for the family, for us, and it put them ahead. But it also kind of told me that in a way, the last 2 years of high school are kind of irrelevant. Okay? So you're basically, because you're going to college and you're getting college credits, even though you're still in high school. I think we need to strengthen our high school. I think we need to challenge kids at the high school level so that they're getting the full benefit of what we're paying for. And then when they go to college, they should be getting something more, something different, something stronger, something more challenging that adds. And so that's why I think they should stay separate. I think we're blurring the lines too much between high school and college.
And it sounds like what you're saying is to address McCleary, there's still, and we all know this, there's still work to do.
Mm-hmm.
Don't start adding to it
Right.
before you solve it.
Yeah.
Is that going to distill
Yes.
it a little bit?
Yeah.
What's your thought on the legislature last year put a bunch of money in the last biennium, put a lot more money towards education funding, trying to comply with this thing. Even with an economy that's growing, they still haven't found enough money, and that's going to be the challenge. Should you be in there again?
Yeah.
What's your kind of? I mean, give me just a broad take on how do you think that money question should be approached, and the one I want to know about is what kind of tax reform would you support? Do you think that's necessary to get to where they need to be?
Yeah. Well, they've increased funding for education, K through 12, from 13.5 to 18 billion over the last 6 years. And yet they're saying that there's still not enough. But it's really not coming across clear to me where they're thinking the shortfall is. And the last piece of legislation is they're going to get evidence on how much levy money is going towards basic education. Because we don't really know, they don't really know what our teacher salaries are earning, is what they're saying. But there is actually already data for that. So technically speaking, levy money is not supposed to go to basic education, but it is going to basic education. But our districts are not reporting on that. They don't report on how levy money is being spent. so the legislators are asking for that. So when they keep saying it's not enough, to me it's not very clear on why it's not enough. They're not being very clear on what the additional funding is needed. I mean, I go to our school board meetings,
So you,
there's enough.
Okay.
So,
so you think the argument is to be had at the Supreme Court? I mean, 'cause the Supreme Court is saying states out of compliance and they're not fulfilling
yeah,
what
and
we've
most
asked
of
them to
their
do.
information is coming from WEA, a lot of it.
Okay.
And I was looking at the figures for education employees. There's like over, I think it's about 150,000. We have 150,000 employed in the educational system right now. About 30 to 35% of those people are teachers. 35%. Okay? You've got 15,000 what they call professionals. That's not including its superintendents. That's not including para-educators. It's not including the counselors, because you've got about 25 different categories of staff there. Okay? But only 30% are teachers. And I've heard people that are teaching up in North Kitsap, they said, we need more teachers. We don't need more bodies in the classroom. And so we need.
Wait, you don't need more body. What are those bodies in the classroom that they don't like?
Well, like in our school district, we just hired people that are in charge of sort of de-escalating issues, for each building. So that was $850,000. So there's either, I don't know.
I mean, and I only ask,
administrators.
Like, when you say bodies in the classroom, in my mind, that's para-educators, things like
Yeah.
that I think have been proven with high needs children, special, things that take the burden off of teachers who are overwhelmed with
To a certain degree, but we're just increasing the administration, and I think we need to look more closely at that and how the money is being spent. That's a concern of mine. And if you look at things that, I'm sorry, I read a lot of the documents and a lot of the reports. And so, for example, we have it came out a recent report on $2.5 million that's going to CT, Career and Technical Education. Okay, for 450 students. And so I asked, so $2.8 million for 450 students, if this kind of came out to like $6,000 per student. We have too much of this sort of special initiative kind of funding that the school districts have to use that they use for funding other things. So there's just a lack of transparency, and they've made it so complicated. And we talk about school boards as enabling us to have local control, but our school boards don't really actually understand all these things.
So how does a freshman House member start to address that? Because this is what you're explaining is very complicated. Because
It is.
You're really saying we need to dig in individually by district, redo the numbers.
Not by district, because most of the things that are happening at district basically come down from the state level.
Yeah, but I'm saying
Yeah.
if you want to get into each, you need to get into answer what you're suggesting. In my head, you would need to go district by district and redo and figure out how much you're spending on this, how much you're spending on this. What are you doing here?
No, I think what we need to look at, if you come to agreement, we have 24 credit requirement, right? And then you have to have a clear model for how many teachers per classroom, which they mostly have.
That's in the ruling.
Yes, and that we pay for that. And then there's some basic minimal structure where, if you have this many students, you have principals, this many counselors. We need to focus on that. And I think we have, and then stop. We need to be more critical about all the other layers of bureaucracy in there that are increasing the responsibilities of teachers, but also distracting them away from teaching.
So you're saying administration is overpowering?
It is.
So are you happy with teacher salary as it is now?
Well, we'd have to look at that because you have the teacher salaries based on state policy, and then you have the reality of what teachers are getting paid.
Do you think there should be teacher salaries made bargained at the state level?
I do.
Yep. Do you think you said earlier when we're talking about
Yeah.
like kind of getting our
Yeah.
not worrying about pre-K, not worrying about community college, focusing
Right.
here. How do charter schools fit into that equation for you? Because it's kind of an extra thing out here,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe they help. I don't know.
I think, as I've been knocking on doors, I talk to a lot of people, some that are educators, but send their children to private school. Other people that are homeschooling, other people that are sending them to private school. A lot of people are really dissatisfied with our public education system. Okay. I think if we have alternatives, and we do have alternatives, and a charter school could be another alternative. I think each child in this state, there's about $7,000 to $9,000 allocated towards their education, and we're all paying for that. And I think that if parents are not happy with the public school system, I think it might be a good idea to have more competition, to push back on the public education system, and to create more new ideas and alternatives, and to let parents and children have more of a voice in what they're looking for in education. So I think charter schools are not a bad idea. I think one of the concerns, though, is it's interesting how much the state and the Department of Education quickly wants to manage and control charter schools. So you'll end up with a situation where a charter school may not be any different than our public school. And I think a lot of teachers, if they had a voice, I would like to hear more from teachers about what they would like to change about our educational system to make it easier for them to teach.
Well, we do have
Yeah.
experiments going on in that, and a new OSPI director coming in, of course. So I'm going to change subjects.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you about another state program, though. Because of your background with some natural resources knowledge, what do you think the Puget Sound Partnership's progress?
Their progress.
What do you think of the idea? How about that?
I think the idea is a good one because there's actually a lot of players, and I actually looked at their plan in fair detail a few months ago. The idea of coordination is really important, and the idea that they're more and more really trying to look at the research and the evidence of what can they do that's going to have the biggest impact. Because there's so many things that you can do that you think will help improve the Puget Sound. And some of them have more science behind them than others. So I think the idea of coordination and doing that and going after the evidence is a good idea. Their challenge is that they don't have a lot of money to use as incentives. So they're having a hard time really getting people to the table. People are busy. People are trying to find their own money, small groups like the Hood Canal Coordinating Council and other groups. So they're trying to find their money from what they can do. And so they don't have a lot of money to incentivize people and
Kind of
support
the
those
nonprofit
programs.
organizations that are
Yeah,
working.
yeah. So, but I think it's a good idea. And I think I was pretty impressed because I looked at their performance management plan and all of the information. So I was pretty impressed with the level of detail that they have in trying to state clear goals and have measurements. But it's like a couple hundred pages long or something. But anyways.
While we're on environmental topics, Governor's cap and trade plan, you've got initiative for carbon tax. Cap and trade plan kind of deals toward industrial facilities. The carbon tax kind of more toward transportation emissions. Your thoughts, both, neither, one or the other?
Well, I don't really care for the cap and trade idea, partly because the way, and I'm going to admit I don't have really in-depth understanding of how it's worked, even though I've heard it explained. But what I kind of hear is that what I see that becoming is another agency with a lot of people to try and figure out a new tax and to collect that tax and to manage that tax. And I think we'll lose a lot of the resources from that. So that's one of the reasons I'm not that supportive of that. And it depends on what you're trying to do with it. Are you trying to collect money with it, or are you actually trying to reduce carbon? Now, one of the biggest contributors of both pollution and I think carbon is cars. Gridlock in Seattle with everybody sitting there with their cars on. And so I think we need to work on that. We need a more efficient transportation system so that, people can keep moving. I, you know, I, I'm an environmentalist, and I've been obsessed with the environment since I was a little girl, to be quite honest. And I've always driven a fuel-efficient car. I drive a Toyota Corolla right now. And over the years, we have that loophole where, we were going to try and increase the use of more fuel-efficient cars. And instead, everybody uses the truck loophole so that they can have an SUV.
What do you mean by the truck loophole?
Well, when they made a rule, I think it was in the 70s, I'm not sure if it was the EPA, but the idea was that all cars had to become more fuel efficient except for those that were used for work or your job, and for moving materials, which was trucks. Okay.
You mean at the manufacturer?
The manufacturer. So this was a manufacturer requirement. So then they came up with SUVs, and that qualify as trucks.
What do you think? How do you think the state should approach the question of there's more, like you said, more efficient vehicles, people driving Prius, all the rest of these things, and yet we're so dependent on the gas tax. We continue to raise the gas tax. How should the state start to adjust that for what's coming in the future?
Well, I'm not sure that we know what's coming in the future, because we still don't have that many Priuses compared to SUVs. So I think we still need to think about the present. I mean, is it at this point, is it really coming to a reduced amount of revenue? Because it's a tax on per gallon, right? It's not a tax on the price of gas. So has our fuel consumption actually really decreased? I don't think so. So for now, it still seems like a reasonable tax. It also has a direct impact in the sense that if you're trying to get people to reduce their driving, they're directly impacted by a gas tax. So I haven't heard of a better alternative to that. And at this point in time, I think it still works. So I'm not sure exactly what's coming up 10 or 20 years from now.
DOT has looked at things like a vehicle mileage traveled approach.
Right.
Or a related thing is maybe more tolling on roads, ideas like that.
Well, I think the one of tracking people's mileage, again, sounds like a lot of government bureaucracy, and it also sounds invasive and into people's privacy. And I don't think it's going to be that much difference than how much gas you use, or the gas tax. So it still doesn't seem very well thought out. With respect to tolling, the auditor came out with a report that says right now our state is not even properly managing the money that's coming in from tolls. And they're misusing that money. And so I think, having a toll for a bridge is a pretty, you have a particular structure that you're trying to pay for. So that may make sense. But I think excessive tolling in order to drive people's behavior or changing, or to generate revenue, it doesn't seem to be working very well. I do think, again, that the Department of Transportation has wasted a lot of money, and we need to really look at that and become more efficient.
What about ferry spending?
Ferry spending.
This is something very important to your district, and you rode the ferry, so you know how important it is. They've been building new boats. They have been investing in that.
Yeah.
What's your opinion of the direction things are headed with WSF right now?
I think we seem to be a little bit better than we were a few years ago. I had a long conversation with a former ferry captain, and who also worked in management. He worked for the ferry system for like 43 years, who had a lot to say on this issue. And one of the concerns is, on the one hand, we could save money by having open competition for ferry construction, which would probably be a good idea. And but one of the big costs with ferries is obviously the daily cost, the fuel, the staffing, these kind of things. And we need to make those decisions on how we manage a system like that based on a solid business plan. Okay, it has to make financial sense. We can't be wasteful with the resources that we have. So for example, every time you use a ferry, that's a lot of wear and tear and risks. And sometimes we're using ferries at times of the day, at nights, in certain location, even though there's very few riders, okay? For political reasons, okay? So we need to be more efficient and look at the good of the
What do you mean
overall.
by political reasons? Aren't those are set by,
Well-
isn't it dictated more by like the unions and hourly schedules, things like that?
Right, I guess by political is there was a very particular story of maintaining the ferry runs in the middle of the night, I think to Vashon or one of the islands, because there were about, 5 to 10 Boeing workers. And so a very small group of workers, and for some reason, for them to get to work, they maintained this ferry run, which, that's what I mean sort of by kind of political. But you're right, a lot of it is union. And I don't know if you guys wrote on this
Yeah.
like years ago, because I remember when it came out, like, okay, we're going to reduce the number of workers on the ferry.
So the Coast Guard says you can't.
And yes, exactly. And so the ferry people, the unions actually went to the Coast Guard. So not only we couldn't reduce, all of a sudden we had to increase. And so we really need to, these are our resources. They belong to the constituents and the taxpayers, and we're paying for this stuff. And this can't be, these decisions should not be based on union workers' preferences or issues or protecting jobs that shouldn't necessarily be protected. I think it has to be based on efficiency and fiscal financial management.
Well, safety is one of the
It's
big
safety.
too. I mean,
Well,
when the Coast Guard says you have to have this many people, what do you do?
right.
I don't know, maybe you can argue the Coast Guard.
I don't know,
Perhaps that's
and I would be
possible.
glad to argue with them, because it was like, okay, they didn't just maintain, they didn't say, no, you can't reduce it. All of a sudden, no, we have to increase it. And then we had a shortage of staff. I think, but it, that was one particular issue, but we need, it can't, I'm supportive of unions, but they should not be driving all of our decision-making.
Should the solid business plan include, fare box recovery percentages?
Well, yeah,
I mean,
probably.
Say, like 70%, 80%.
It could be, especially in particular runs. If you're having runs that you're losing, completely, then I think we need to have an open and transparent conversation about maybe we should reduce or eliminate certain runs. And, Bainbridge, and then you're always going to have certain runs, like Bainbridge, that always gets full cost recovery. But on the other hand, you don't want to reduce the, Bremerton runs, because then you'll even have more people driving through Bainbridge. But yeah, within reason. Yeah.
But as a capitalist and an economist, is it, as a capitalist and economist and a ferry commuter, should the state still be subsidizing these runs, and is it an appropriate amount what they're subsidizing right now? Because you're right, some don't pencil out.
We subsidize our roads, so they are similar to our roads, So you have to keep that in mind, you also have to think about the other externalities, in the sense that, okay, you're saying, we might say, oh, that's just the Kitsap people that are using those ferries. Okay, well, if you took away those ferries, do you want all of us Kitsap County people driving through Seattle? Right now you have us off of your roadways. So you have to look at that as well.
Do you think, and this is the one, I get hung up on this question,
Yeah.
but do you think the legislature should ever consider allowing Washington State ferries to run passenger-only boats?
It depend. It would depend on the business plan, whether it makes money, makes sense financially. Yeah, it was interesting. One of the things that I thought of with Kitsap Transit, their idea of the passenger-only ferry, and I thought, that could be kind of nice if that existed, like between Bremerton and Seattle. If we would stop those, we were able to use that to stop the late night runs on our state ferries. My concern is that people won't really collaborate like that, and or the unions will say, no, we got to keep these runs going. But that would be a good plan if we did have a passenger-only ferry system, and then we said, hey, we've got this, and if you want to go to Seattle and go out at night, you can use this one, but we're not going to be running our big state ferries after 10 o'clock or something.
At least it's within the same system.
Yes.
Tell me, you're running as a Republican.
Mhm.
Tell me what parts of the party platform you agree most, what do you agree most strongly with? Why do you identify with that party? And then tell me something that, this is something maybe I don't agree with my own party on. Or I'm gonna
You wanna
question,
get me in
or
trouble
I'm
here.
gonna, or you don't have to say you don't agree with it. I would question my leadership about it.
I'm a fiscal conservative. So that's the biggest reason and the commonality between me and the Republican Party. I want government efficiency. I also, in many cases, I think less government would be better. I don't think government has to be involved in all aspect of our lives, and that just seems to be creeping out of control. So that would be. I also feel passionately about our human rights, our constitutional rights, especially with respect to freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And I feel like we're getting to the point in society where, and I think this is where there's becoming a lot of frustrations, that people feel like they can no longer speak their own views without being called a hater or something. And I think that's unhealthy. I really feel it's important to have freedom of speech and also freedom of religion. I'm a Christian. I'm used to living and working and knowing, and it sounds like a cliche to say some of my best friends are not Christians, but they are. And I respect that. And I love having that openness and being able to talk. And this is where I stand. I don't expect you to have the same faith as me, but I want to be able to express my beliefs without feeling afraid. So that's where two big areas that I feel are really important is overall our human rights. Disagreements. There are some things that I'm less passionate about, but I don't necessarily disagree.
Yeah, I don't mean to frame you like that,
Right.
but kind of,
Okay.
where would you, if you're new to the party,
Mm-hmm.
what would you say? Hey guys, are we thinking about this? Or hey guys, we could do better here.
Wow. And I want to
maybe I'll
clarify
ask.
also that the state Republican Party seems to me, I'm new to the Republican Party, I'll have to confess. I've been fairly a nonpartisan person, but there's a big difference between the state party and the national party. So from the state party, I think it's not.
Let me ask it
yeah,
in a
okay.
different way,
Go
so
ahead.
you're not so on the spot.
Okay.
What is something you've seen the local Democrat, and I'll make it local so it's maybe even simpler.
Okay.
Local Democratic delegation, which has been represented in 23rd, what's something that they've been doing that you say, yeah, I agree with that. I think they're doing a good job there. Maybe an issue they've been working on.
You know, the last couple of years, I actually went to Democrat meetings to see what they were talking about. I'd go to the Democrat women's meetings. I used to be on the League of Women Voters, which is nonpartisan, and I was looking for the issues that they were working on or talking about, and I actually couldn't find it. And in fact, some of the points was, no, we just gotta make sure we don't get any Republicans in office. That, I don't care for that partisan approach from either party. I don't want the party to be either party shouldn't be, hey, we just gotta keep the Dems out or we gotta keep the Republicans out. So, it's interesting that you asked that.
Maybe
I'm
that's,
trying to
no,
think,
that's,
I guess.
what you're saying is exactly why I'm pushing on
Right.
this. Because what candidates like to say is they say, I'm gonna go down to Olympia and I'll reach across the aisle. That's the phrase
Yeah.
everyone wants to use.
Yeah.
So I wanna know, what are you gonna reach across the aisle on? What do you see going on? Say, we can work together on this. I understand where you're at.
Well, I think the Democrats, I think both sides, but I think education is very important to everyone. And I think, and I think we all want quality education for our kids. And then it's a matter of discussing the details. I also think, I suppose Democrats have this reputation of being more pro-environmental. I'm a very strong environmentalist. Northwest, and I'm very protective of the Puget Sound, and I really like and I don't know if I don't think it's been just Democrats, but I really like what we've been doing with North Kitsap with the public-private partnership conserving the land up there and making more parks. So that's very important to me. And I think we need to do more in the area of mental health. And I would say, okay, if you want me to, I would say that I don't like the idea of doing, at the national level, the idea of doing away with Obamacare. Firstly, I don't think we should call it Obamacare. Kind of annoys me. And and I don't think it helps to do away with programs. We need to fix it and tweak it and refine it and make it more cost efficient. But I suppose Democrats maybe are pushing more for, I think everybody should have sick leave. I don't think necessarily the state should pay for it, but I think telling employers you should provide sick leave for your staff, I think so. I don't agree with the minimum wage increase though.
Good, real quick.
Sorry.
K-12 committee or higher ed committee? Which one would you go after?
Higher ed would probably be easier.
And then I wanted to ask a question on homelessness. It's
Yes.
something that's very, especially in this community, I think, thanks to the Kitsap Sun, to really pushing it and bring it to the forefront. What do you see as far as the state handling this issue? Because I brought a friend recently from, I think it's from Africa, and he said Senegal. And we walked around and he was just like, dude, this looks like where I'm at.
I've been to
And
Senegal, it doesn't, but.
Yeah. No, he said, yeah. He said, look, we got tents. We got people that are on the outskirts that have tents and everything. So on a state level, what do you think needs to happen?
I almost think it would be better, I like the way we're doing it in Kitsap County where we actually passed a tax for this. I think it's a more efficient use of money and we'd probably be doing a better job if we handle it locally. I'm not sure that the state, other than the state's responsible for the state mental health facility, which they obviously need to get a better handle of. So what actually, is that your question?
You know,
The state mental
like
health?
because
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest issue. Everybody just looks at the mental health issue.
Yeah.
But Kitsap knows, rent's
Yeah.
going up everywhere.
Well,
So
yeah.
what can the state do if it's like you said,
Yeah.
if it comes locally?
You mean with respect to homelessness?
Yeah.
I think it's better local. I actually I asked, I think, is it Kirsten Jewell? And I actually have communicated with her and looked at the data and asked her for more data and she gave me more data. Because homelessness, you have to look at the causes of homelessness and that's based on different people. You've got some people they have addiction problems.
Right.
We need to focus on providing support to get out of addiction problems. For some people, it really is, a family issue, and they have kids, and they need housing. Then you've got veterans who have other issues as well, and they also have different support programs. So I know one of the issues, like they said, we have homeless kids, but they were also including couch surfing kids. So sometimes they're not actually on the street. And then they said, well, we need tents. I said, how are we helping kids by putting them in tents? We need to do something more than that. If you have kids in school, it's not going to help, for them to live in a tent. So we need to look at the details of why people are homeless and address each of those issues and look at what are the biggest causes.
So if we say that we take the state, because what it sounds like you're saying is keep it more local, how does the funding, where does the funding mechanism come in without having the state involved?
Like I said, I think we'd get more funding and it'd be more efficient if we came up with our own tax base on that issue. But you also have to look at the existing, there's already a great deal of existing and federal funding, right? So, and we have programs. Are we using that money well? So we have subsidized housing, we have HUD, I forget what they stand, Housing for Urban Development. We have community commerce, we have grants. So there's when I was the King County Workforce Area Director, one of the things I noticed, because we partnered with nonprofits, is that people were dismissive or not very aware of existing state programs. There's all kinds of money right there that we're not managing very well. And we need to use that. And that was one of the things that I tried to work on when I was there. And so we need to really, and make sure that those programs are managed well locally.
All right, we are just about out of time. Let us conclude. We're going to give you, we always give you an opportunity to wrap things up. If there's anything we missed asking, and also tell us, and I'm not inviting you to take shots to anyone, but what separates you from the others in the primary race?
One, my professional background. I have been doing the kind of analysis and research on public policies and how the private sector works my whole career, and developing programs that with specific outcomes. I've also worked for the state. It's amazing how many legislators, people run for office that have never actually worked for a government agency. So I know how government works. I'm familiar with quite a few of our government programs and how we can make them more efficient. So that's a difference. I look at the detailed issues, and I look at the policies and analyze them. What are the unintended consequences? So we need that more critical thinking, more analytical thinking. Also, our incumbent has been in office for 12 years, and we've had a Democratic majority. And although they talk about how they cut funding, I looked at our budget, the thing, our state funding has not decreased over the last 10 years. It might have almost plateaued during the recession, but it never went down, despite the fact that they talk about program cuts. Okay, so we need to be more financially efficient. We need to ask more questions. We can't do everything for everyone. We're going to have, one, we need to fund education, but we have a growing aging population. I'm on the tail end. Somebody said baby boomers are 65, where it's actually more like 56, And so we're going to have a lot of us leaving the workforce, and we're going to need more support, but we're also going to be competing with the education system. Who's going to pay for all of this? Okay? We need to get more efficient. We can't do everything. So I would say that my education, my professional experience, and also one of the reasons I ran is I've gone to all of these, I've watched our legislators over the last 6 years, and they've gotten really comfortable. And we need people that will listen to other people's ideas and other people's perspective and have respect for other viewpoints. And that's why I'm running for state representative. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.